Again, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Senthil, and thanks for taking out your time today afternoon and joining us for another SharePoint webinar series. This time, we are discussing about migrating to SharePoint 2016. SharePoint 2016 release candidate is already out, and RTM is likely this month or early next month. A quick search on SharePoint 2016 in Google yielded about 181,000 results. There is a lot of talk about SharePoint 2016 even before it gets released. So we are having a presentation which is going to take about 40 minutes to get over. Post that, we'll answer questions if you may have. As a general information, the webinar will be recorded and emailed to all the attendees. Attendees will be muted through the webinar. If you have any questions, use the question box in the control panel, and all questions will be answered at the end. If you have any issues joining the webinar or anything you want to know, you can drop a quick note to the email ID listed in your screen now. Okay, we have been doing a lot of webinars, particularly on SharePoint. Listed in the screen are the 3 recent webinars which we have done. We did test drive Microsoft Power BI, and we already did a webinar on SharePoint 2016. That's getting this to SharePoint 2016, and we also did a webinar on Migrate your internet to cloud. All these webinars are hosted on our website. The link gives you access to that. Anyway, the recording will be shared to you. Please feel free to browse these recordings. Before we deep dive into the webinar, quick introduction about Trigent, who we are. We are a mid-level Microsoft Gold Certified Partner IT services firm in business for the last 20 years, generated about 30 million in revenue, worked with a variety of platforms, let it be SharePoint, Yammer, Azure, have experience working with 100+ clients, executed about 120 projects with a total of 180,000 man-hour work experience. Headquartered in Boston, Massachusetts, with other 3 offices across the globe. Highly rated when it comes to executing SharePoint projects. Have close to 100+ SharePoint consultants working across a variety of SharePoint projects. Here's a quick glance at the list of customers who we have worked or currently working with. Our customer ranges from startups to Fortune companies. And here are our co-speakers for the day. I let them introduce themselves.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Myself is Trigent. I work as a SharePoint consultant with the Trigent software at present. And I have, from the technical expertise, I have a total of 11 years of experience into Microsoft technologies. Among that, out of 7 years is moving to SharePoint. I have started working in March 2007. And I have quite good experience into SharePoint 2010 from out-of-box features or custom features. And later on, I worked in SharePoint 2013. That was quite exciting, and the experience was very nice. And as well, I have already started creating POCs, having introductions to SharePoint 2016.
Good afternoon. This is Chella Palaniappan. I'm VP of Client Services for Trigent. I work with Trigent and his technology team on Microsoft-related and SharePoint-related technologies. And I also work with our teams on other non-Microsoft open source and Java platform. Here's the agenda for the day. We would briefly look at SharePoint's evolution and why one should consider migrating to SharePoint 2016, or the compelling reasons that are there for you to move to SharePoint 2016. Much of our conversation would be on the migration process, the plan, prepare, approach, migrate, test, multiple phases of the migration process itself. We'll talk about all of them. We'll talk about challenges that one may face in the migration process. We'll also briefly touch upon how you could be migrating from other platforms into SharePoint 2016. Finally, we wrap that away with key takeaways. Let's look at the evolution of SharePoint. If you look at the release history and the timeline in the past, SharePoint Portal Server 2001 and 2003 focused mostly on intranet collaboration and portals. Starting with March 2007, the focus shifted more towards enterprise features such as content management, e-discovery, document sets, record centers, etc. For SharePoint 2013, the focus was cloud and enterprise social. The on-prem 2013 defined the feature set of Office 365. Turning that on its head, the cloud version has now become the definition point for the SharePoint 2016 feature sets. Let's look at the evolution of SharePoint from a decade ago. Primarily, that started as a document management, then site portals, search, BI were added. A common management layer was added to provide control. Then SharePoint became a platform on which solutions can be built. The same core elements, experiences, management, and extensibility was followed in newer products too, such as Lync, Exchange, and Office 365. SharePoint 2016 is designed as the most secure, reliable, scalable update, bringing innovation from Office 365 and making the hybrid easier for migration. In timeline-wise, the beta was released somewhere in August 2015. The release candidate was released or became available on January 20th of this year. The RTM is expected to be on the Q2, but there are quite a few rumors or sources quoting that it will become available on March 14th of this year. Let's look at why one should consider migrating to SharePoint 2016. SharePoint 2016 will be focused on delivering value to customers as part of their on-premises deployment, while making it easier to take advantage of cloud innovation through hybrid deployments of SharePoint Server with Office 365. The three big areas that are the focus areas are improved user experience, cloud-inspired infrastructure, compliance, and reporting. If you look at improved user experience, SharePoint Server 2016 will provide improved mobile access to content, people, and application, along with touch-based experience across devices and screen sizes. User experience is going to be on par with Office 365, reducing the friction in a hybrid deployment scenarios. SharePoint 2016 is the first on-premise server release representative of Microsoft experience running SharePoint at scale in Office 365. SharePoint 2016 will provide a broad array of features and capabilities designed to make certain that the sensitive information remains protected, with investments in data loss prevention, new scenarios to enable data encryption, and compliance tools that span on-premises servers and Office 365. These provide a balance between user self-service and corporate policy adherence. Let's look at some of the features that make more sense for different types of people, user groups. First is the end user, the users. The responsive design and touch mobile experience provide a look and feel that is consistent with the device that is being used. Next, the share has been simplified very, very much. Just click the share button on the top right corner of every page, enter the names of people you want to share with, and press enter. That's it, you're done. The people you just shared with will get an email invitation to link to the site. If you want to find out who already has access to a particular site, simply go to the settings. On the top right corner, click shared with, and you'll see all the people that particular site has been shared with or I have access with. Lastly, the hybrid search. You can search and get back all the content you need via Dell, discover new information on the new Dell profile experiences, and even have the ability to organize content in boards for easy sharing and access. Cloud Hybrid Search offers users the ability to seamlessly discover relevant information across on-premises and Office 365. Next, let's look at the benefits for IT professionals. IT professionals, since SharePoint 2016 is going to be on-premises deployment, IT professionals are going to be very eagerly looking at what it provides to them. One of the big improvements is zero downtime patching. There is no downtime to update with the server, so you're not going offline to update. The incremental patching, the service packs and cumulative updates are better built and smaller in size. Just 2 files and 1 service pack is all that is needed. SharePoint 2016 also provides us advanced analytics and reporting services, better statistics on how SharePoint is being used and how things may fail. Real-time telemetry, such as latency, 404 errors, document usage, statistics, etc., are very much available. The SharePoint logging API operates on the enhanced usage database that has been improved significantly. There's a lot of information on data available in that usage database now. The next for the IT professional is the simplified deployment scenarios. It has been done through admins can now define each server in the role of the farm topology by selecting one of the 5 predefined roles. SharePoint will automatically configure the server based on the roles to produce optimized performance. This simplifies the deployment, improves performance and reliability, eases capacity planning, and farm scalability. The health analyzer will enforce the servers in the farm are in compliance to their designated roles and reconfigure to match the expected configuration without any manual intervention. However, main role is for moderate to large deployments only, meaning it requires at least 4 servers in a farm. For simpler installations, you can just choose custom and have your server configured in the way that you prefer. Lastly, for developers, one of the most likely features of Office 365, the App Launcher, is now available on-premises in the 2016 version. Office 365 API are REST services that provide access to the high-value content such as email, contacts, people, notification, folders from SharePoint, etc. Using this, we can build application on any language: JavaScript, Ruby, Python, PHP, and of course, ASP.NET. The Office 365 SDK for Visual Studio, Eclipse, and Android, or Xcode help reduce the complexity of the code you need to write to access Office 365 APIs. Lastly, the SharePoint 2016 is limitless or almost limitless. Terabyte-sized databases now are officially supported. 100,000 site collections for content databases are allowed. Effective list view threshold has been increased over 5,000 items through automated index management. Maximum file size is now 10 GB, and there are no character restrictions on the file names. Drag and drop with files with even ampersand in them. Search scale doubled to 500 million items. With all these compelling features and benefits, SharePoint 2016 is a great choice for current SharePoint users and also for people who are considering to move from another platform. With that, we'll focus on to the migration process, and I will turn over to Trigent to talk about the migration process and the steps involved.
Thank you, Chella, for providing a brief introduction about SharePoint 2016, what an end user will benefit as a developer or IT professional or as any SharePoint user, and as well for an organization. And yeah, of course, we know how we are excited about the release of SharePoint 2016, and of course we are waiting for that final release of the product. Meanwhile, when we are expecting to be released from the final version of SharePoint 2016, today we are here to discuss on or to make an understanding on the migration of SharePoint 2016. So here what we are starting with is with a roadmap. Yeah, what is a roadmap? Well, we define a roadmap for a sequence of execution steps in order to identify the milestones that we cross over before arriving at our destination. So what is our destination? Yes, that's what we are discussing today, migration. Migration to SharePoint 2016. Okay, now we are moving to SharePoint 2016. So what is our current environment? It can be any older version of SharePoint, start from WSS, MOS 2007, SharePoint 2010, or even SharePoint 2013. Also, apart from the existing version of SharePoint, we could also migrate from the other external systems. So we will have a look at like what external systems we can migrate and what is the benefit we get once we migrate to SharePoint 2016. We will pass our migration step through 5 different phases, that is plan, prepare, approach, migrate, and test. So what we are doing in a planning? Planning, that's for an activity is planning for an activity is significantly important while compared with its execution. Likewise, we should plan for SharePoint migration. What we have to do and how we have to do, that's what we are going to do during the planning phase. So how we have to do planning? We have to collect the relevant data. We have to understand the migration dates. We have to identify the migration content, which business process or which site to be migrated, and what is the priority of migration, and is there a downtime for the migration, and also we have to prepare about the contingency plan, and what if plan A goes wrong, we have to opt for plan B, hence there is no downtime and the end user is not at all affected. Okay, so we discussed about why we should plan and the factors to be considered while planning. Let us have a glance at how can we gather this pre-migration information data. There are different ways to gather this pre-migration data if we are doing with a manual approach or if it is a tool-based approach. Generate the pre-migration data and prepare an inventory. That is what we are doing in planning. So the inventory will contain the information of the site which has to be migrated, what content it has, who is the ownership of it, and when is the migration, and what will be the target environment, and what is that URL. All this information will be hosted and made as an inventory in a public access place where every user can view and see the progress. A pre-migration report can be generated either using a tool or using a manual-based migration. So here, if you could look at, we have a PowerShell command which will help us to generate a CSV file from where we can extract and generate the inventory data. Let us have a look and understand how does a migration report will look like. Yes, here is a sample report that is generated using a tool. So if we closely watch this report, there are some information about errors and some about warnings. If we can list out some page layouts cannot be found, or some users and groups were not available. So what will happen for these cases? So that is what we are going to discover and we are going to understand during the prepare and next phases. Planning is equally important for any execution. Henceforth, we are going to dive into what is a governance and information architecture while planning the execution, the process of migration. So what is SharePoint governance? Let us make it simple. It's simply a set of rules that helps to facilitate the use of SharePoint site or its content or any metadata, or it could be the maintenance of these data. And why we should consider a SharePoint governance while migrating? Yes. So let me take a few examples to explain the migration process or to explain the governance in migration. In a scenario, a subsite. Okay, we know like a SharePoint will consist of sites, subsites, or any content in SharePoint list or in a SharePoint library. So who can create a site is something which we want to restrict as part of an end user. So the default option is been to create a subsite has been hidden or has been removed. That is a rule which we have applied as part of governance. And we can make a custom request submission which to create a subsite within a site or within a site collection, and that can be restricted only by the farm administrator. So there are different ways to do. Why we have to do this? That is what we don't want to junk our farm or the SharePoint farm with a huge unnecessary or unattended information and data. So that can be managed as a rule. So that's where governance comes, and that's where we can consider while migrating why we need a SharePoint governance. Likewise in the user permissions and security. So while adding a user, who can add that user? Who will be permitted to add any user, whether it be owners or whether it be removed from every option, and it has to be done by a super user so that it can be managed through a custom page or custom layouts page within the SharePoint. What is the governance we have to apply during a backup and restore? Yes, SharePoint, as we are using since a few years within an organization, the content will be huge enough, or as well the information could be, the importance of the data could vary. So how much relevancy does the content have at present date is what we have to look at, and hence we have to, while doing a backup and restore, we can identify that and archive the information. So archive more than the documents which are of more than a year, archive it or to a different site, and as well if it goes beyond that, we can have it to be saved to external device. So these are some of the governance which we can consider during our migration process. That's where we are planning. So how does information architecture sync with the SharePoint migration? Yes, it is during the migration time you can follow and the content structure and identify the data relevancy and as well apply the metadata. Yes, metadata includes the site content types or in the navigation or metadata store, and as well the taxonomies which can be applied for information architecture. We have planned about governance and information architecture for a migration. Next, what is the environment readiness? So that is another part we have to consider during our plan phase. We have to plan for source environment readiness with service packs and the database updates. So why we should do a source environment readiness? Yes, when we consider WSS, that is Windows SharePoint Services, when we started like in 2003, and when moving to SharePoint 2007, we do not need a migration, but we are upgrading the environment. We do not need a physical environment, but we can ourselves upgrade. So that's where we are doing a pre-upgrade check. And as well, we are upgrading the information within the source environment. So when we move from MOS 2007 to SharePoint 2010 or even to SharePoint 2013, we can upgrade the database. So database includes the content database. So if we are doing a manual approach of migration, we can do that by detach the content database from the source environment and also move that to the target environment. So that's where we have the option to upgrade from SharePoint MOS 2007 to SharePoint 2010 and then to 2013, later on 2016. All this, we should have an intermediate environment with the database upgrade on each of the versions. Of course, we have the option to skip all these intermediate environments if we are using a tool-based migration approach. So that was our planning phase. Now we are going to be prepared for the migration. So what we are doing in the prepare phase? Yes, we have to be prepared about the files and other items. Of course, like SharePoint is a content store, and the content includes the SharePoint list items or the subsites or sites or even any other huge information with the files, approvals, workflows, and all. So the files have to be checked in if we would like to move to the next if we would like to move to the target environment, the files with the same version. If we do not want to skip any data or the versioning, we should suggest like be prepared with the file check-ins. Next, we have to consider about the orphan accounts and the sites and subsites. So we have to be prepared about whether the sites, subsites, which is having the users, which is unattended sites, whether we have to be migrated or not. That's what we are going to be prepared. The next is how we will manage with the large list. Should we migrate this information or should we archive this? So that's what we will be prepared about, how much we have to carry forward with the destination or with the target environment. When we consider the preparing for a migration, there are certain functionalities which we have developed, of course, like when we consider in MOS 2007, there are functionalities which we have developed using custom solutions and which can be achieved now, or which Microsoft has introduced with the out-of-box features. So how we have to do the migration for that content. So that's where we have to be prepared about what we have to migrate, how we have to migrate. Let's look at the approach. So that's the next phase in the migration. So when we are going to migrate to SharePoint 2016, we have to evaluate what features SharePoint 2016 provides and what we have in the source, so that whether what version of SharePoint 2016 will suit for our requirement. Yes, SharePoint has a multiple edition, that is of a standard edition or the enterprise edition. And once we consider about SharePoint 2010 or SharePoint 2013, we had a SharePoint Foundation edition. Yes, in SharePoint 2016, Microsoft has decided not to release any SharePoint 2016 with a Foundation edition. And however, SharePoint 2013 Foundation will remain as such. As well, in SharePoint Standalone Edition, how we will get a standalone edition. So SharePoint 2016 release candidate does not support a standalone edition. That means there is always a installation with all the full package is not going to be appeared, but we have to have a separate servers and separate installation during the setting up of or configuration of SharePoint 2016. So once we have evaluated the features during approach, we are going to identify what is the approach for migration. It can be a manual migration or it can be a tool-based migration. So how we will do this manual migration or how we will do a tool-based migration, we are going to visit in the next slide about the migrate phase. So here we want to list a few of the tools which are available in market are Metalogix, ShareGate, SharePoint or Metaverse. Each tool has its own peculiar features, and as well at the end of the day or every tool will help us to do the migration from a target to source environment. So here comes our migrate phase. As we had already completed in our study of environment and data, that's where we had spent most time during the planning phase. So we are recollecting what we have implemented or what we have planned, and what is the source and the destination hardware, as well the software and the service pack. We have to be very well aware of it and be prepared. So as we have discussed about two ways of migration, that is about manual migration or the tool-based migration. So let's look at what we do in a manual migration. Of course, SharePoint is saving the information as in SQL Server, as it has all the configuration database and the SharePoint installation, all the service applications, and as well the content information saved within the SQL Server. So what we are going to do during manual migration is the database detach from the source and upgrade to the next environment. That is, if I consider an example, start from MOS 2007, which is in the SQL Server 2008 R2, detach that and move it to the next version of SharePoint 2010, attach that and upgrade using the PowerShell commands. Consequently, we have to get that to SharePoint 2010, then move on to SharePoint 2013, and finally we have to do all these steps in SharePoint until we reach SharePoint 2016. Instead, if we are going with a tool-based migration, what we have to follow up is install and configure the tool. So that's where we have to connect to the source and target environments from the tool and decide on what are the list to be migrated or what site we have to migrate or the users and their permissions. So we can plan and execute the migration, as well we can schedule the jobs, so that will help us executing the script during the off business hours. In fact, tool-based migration also help us in evaluating during the migration and generate few of the intermediate reports. Yes, that will help us to, as an administrator, can address these exceptions which has occurred during the migration phase, and also that will identify the pitfalls and provide a resolution in between. Yes, now that's what we have planned and we have executed. So now all is well and we are in the test phase. So how we will evaluate and how we will manage our migration is success, and how we will evaluate it. So that's where we have to evaluate our test connection, whether the target environment within SharePoint 2016, who can access, and what is the permission levels. All the information has been imported from source to the target, and the files which are available, and of course the look and feel. That is one of the primary factor if we are moving from SharePoint 2010 or MOS 2007 with the new advanced UI and the responsive UI, as we have discussed about what are the advanced features in SharePoint 2016, and as well any customizations. If there are customizations in source environment, how much we have achieved. These are some of the test cases which we are going to execute. Of course, there are certain reports we can generate with a post-migration that will list any exceptions occurred and any broken links. So how we will evaluate? So when we started our migration during plan, we have executed some pre-migration reports. Similarly, we have a post-migration report we can generate, and we will ideally we can compare each side by side. That will help us success rate for the migration. So hence we have completed our migration process. Now let us look at what challenges during a migration phase can occur. Let's see like a few of the common challenges which we have faced during the migration. Yes, how we will move a huge volume of data. That is one of the common challenge if we say like what is the timeline which is required. So if it says like a huge volume of data, how much of data which we have in a site, and that depends on the gigabytes of data, and as well if the data is huge, how we will do the data transfer policy. So all this applies to the migration from source to target environment, and how we are going to address the ownership or the orphan site and the orphan accounts. Next, I would also highlight one of the challenge which we have faced about running instances of custom workflows. Yes, workflows are common part of SharePoint, and that will ease our life. So how does it execute? And so from the source environment, if we have a workflow which is being executed with multiple stages, and when we move that to the target environment, the custom workflows cannot retain the status from the source to target. So what would happen is, once we move that workflow, we have to execute once and retain that environment. Let us look at few of the challenges which we have faced during migration from WSS2 or MOS 2007 to SharePoint. There are few of the site templates that is called FAB40 templates. So what is FAB40 templates? That is what we have as a site template in SharePoint 2007, and which is no longer available after SharePoint 2010. So hence migration of a site of a FAB40 template would be a challenge. What we are SharePoint we can take care is on migration. Some of the tools will help us to migrate the content or the list and the library files to the target environment. Similarly, there are some of the site templates which has been deprecated from SharePoint 2010. For example, a blank site which was available in SharePoint 2010 has been deprecated, and during the migration, it will be migrated to the equivalent site, which will be a team site in SharePoint 2016. When we consider about workflows, there are also some challenges which has faced about the workflow engine. SharePoint 2010 used a workflow engine of SharePoint itself, and when we moved to SharePoint 2013, it has started using Workflow Manager, but SharePoint 2013 supports either of SharePoint 2010 workflow or SharePoint 2013 workflow, and henceforth inside SharePoint 2016 it is going to execute completely with a Workflow Manager. So that's where we have to consider about how we will recreate the workflow with a SharePoint 2016. Adding to that, SharePoint 2016 has deprecated few of the features. Let us have a look at what features have been deprecated. Hence, once we move our SharePoint source environment, what we will lose. Microsoft has removed some of the features. One among that is like Excel services. So Excel services is one of the common feature which we have used since the SharePoint was 2007 or SharePoint 2010 or in SharePoint 2013. Yes. Inside we have created some BI features or Excel with business BCS or business content management system, and how we have accessed that. Yeah, once Microsoft has deprecated Excel services, what we achieve, how we will achieve it is like using SharePoint has introduced Office Web App Server that will help us the SharePoint online environment and to generate the report and as well access the documents online. One other feature is about tags and notes, which we have quite familiar with MOS 2007 and the SharePoint 2010, where users can be tagged and the content can be tagged, and as well we can follow, also we can create some notes. All this information can be archived in as an administrator in SharePoint 2016, but from SharePoint 2016 onwards, it is not going to be, there is no tag feature. So these are like a few of the challenges when we are migrating, or we have to make sure whether our migration should include this content or we have to keep that behind. As we discussed about the migration process and the challenges we have faced during, or we could face during the migration. So hence since now we have discussed about migration from SharePoint or the previous versions of SharePoint to SharePoint 2016. So these are some other platforms which we can migrate from Lotus Notes or a Documentum or some of the file servers. It's about a content management system or few of the cloud-based files, that is a Dropbox or Google Docs, which can be migrated to SharePoint 2016. And what we gain in migrating to SharePoint 2016 is, as we have started with what all the features we have in SharePoint 2016, it is a collaborative feature, collaboration and a documents repository, and which can be integrated with a Salesforce or Microsoft Dynamics or SAP are two few of the items to list here. At end of the day, end of this webinar, what are the key takeaways which we are going to do? We have looked at the SharePoint 2016 key features, and we have looked at SharePoint migration from any source to at the destination we are reaching to SharePoint 2016. And why we should do is what we have in SharePoint 2016, we are going to achieve a comprehensive solution for which will help us with a connected information work, and that also how much optimized a people can work in an organization, and which preserves the structured process, the complaints, and within an organization. Yes, we have accessed about a few of the hybrid environment within a cloud. With a SharePoint 2016 will provide that is of the cloud phase and a on-premise environment, and all this including how one can or how an organization can benefit is what we have looked at in SharePoint 2016. Yep, that's what I could conclude with SharePoint 2016 and about the migration.
Great. Let me quickly summarize what we went through today. We started with the release history and roadmap of SharePoint, then discussed about a few strong business reasons why enterprise should migrate to SharePoint 2016, and what does the platform offer for end user, IT professional, and a developer. Then we moved on to the most important aspect of migration process, the roadmap, which Srijit spoke about, which covered the plan, prepare, approach, migrate, and test phases. Finally, we ended with discussing about common challenges in migration. So this is what we wanted to go through today. So it's time for questions. We already have quite a lot of questions. Wow. But please go ahead and type any more questions you have. We'll make sure those get answered as well. But here is the first question for the day. This is about costing. Okay. The question is, what would be the cost of migrating to SharePoint 2016?
Okay. Yeah. Cost of migration, that depends on how we are migrating and from what is your source environment. So if it is like a environment with a older version of SharePoint, that is of WSS 3.0 or MOS 2007, of course, we will be passing through different phases, and how much content you have, that is also a factor to consider while estimating the migration. So there are two approaches to do. If we are going to do with a manual approach, we have to set up intermediate environments with a SharePoint 2010 or SharePoint 2013 to reach our SharePoint 2016. In fact, we can also skip all this migration, skip all the environments and the tools by having a third-party tool which will help us to direct migration.
Okay. Here's our next question. Anything from IT to be specifically considered while migrating to SharePoint 2016?
Yes. So SharePoint Foundation version, that was something which were applicable since SharePoint 2013. But in SharePoint 2016, there is no SharePoint Foundation which is going to be deprecated or which is not at all exist. So that is the free version which Microsoft has provided, and any migration from that will not be applicable. And as well, I would also include SharePoint is going to continue with the SharePoint 2013 version of the Foundation Edition. And for a standalone installation mode, yes. So for a standalone installation, there is no standalone installation, as I have already mentioned about a few of the challenges. We have already covered that. There is no standalone installation, but it has to be considered as a custom or a complete form installation.
Here's the next. This is a pretty lengthy question. Okay. So the question is, we are on SharePoint 2010. The first part of the question is, till when can I run the same version? The next part is, when is the latest I have to upgrade to the next version of SharePoint?
Okay. Let me answer your question one by one. So first of all, I could get that till when I can run with the same version of a SharePoint. Yes, Microsoft has put SharePoint 2010 on an extended support mode, which means you can still get some support for your issues. However, each of the tickets raised will get a charge, and even if you are a Microsoft partner. Also, since SharePoint 2010 is not on a mainstream support and only on extended support, major fix requests related to the security will not be supported, which is we have to highlight. Yeah, I see the other part. When is the latest that I have to be migrated to the next version of SharePoint? Generally, Microsoft follows a 5 years of product cycle and will probably support a SharePoint 2010 in an extended support mode, which I would say about a SharePoint with a 2020. However, it is not recommended to continue with the product so long, even once it is in a deathbed. I would recommend you to wait for about a quarter once SharePoint 2016 is introduced with the final release, and you could plan for a migration for your content.
Okay, so here's the next one. What is the alternate solution for SharePoint Designer since the feature won't be available in SharePoint 2016?
Yes, so there is no SharePoint Designer 2016. That's the update so far what we get from Microsoft, and even then the customizations or the workflows or any other changes which user is quite familiar with the SharePoint Designer can be implemented using SharePoint Designer 2013.
Okay, so here's the next one. It's about upgrading SharePoint. The question is, can I upgrade SharePoint from 2010 to 2016 directly instead of taking the 2010, 13, 16 route?
Yes. As a native approach, that's what we have discussed about manual approach. You cannot do that. You cannot skip intermediate environments. You would need to migrate to SharePoint 2013, then to SharePoint 2016. But if you are using a tool, third-party tool, as we have identified few, Metalogic or ShareGate or any other tools, you can skip the intermediate versions and directly achieve your target environment, SharePoint 2016.
Great. So here's the next one on branding. Is branding entirely different in SharePoint 2016?
Okay, so that depends on from where you are being migrated, where is your source environment. So if you are coming from MOS 2007 or SharePoint 2010, you will feel that experience. But if you are coming from SharePoint 2013, there is not much. In fact, it will look alike as Office 365, and it will be familiar with Office 365. Of course, as part of branding, Microsoft has introduced with a responsive UI and a few more additional features that will help with a tabbed view or a model box to view the page and additional information.
Oh, here's another one which just came in, a new question. Can the migration retain my file properties like retaining created by, modified by, and version history?
Yes, absolutely. Either of the migration approach, whether it is a tool-based migration or manual migration, can retain the metadata to be preserved.
Okay, I don't have any more questions in the queue, but I would suggest let's wait for a few seconds to a minute to see if there are any new questions which comes up. Okay, so I don't see any more new questions. So that brings us to the end of the webinar. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thanks for your questions. Again, please don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have any further questions. We would be happy to go into much more detail if that would be helpful. So thank you very much. You have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.